Welcome to our third session in thinking deeply about characters in our second unit. So far, you have worked on thinking deeply about characters by expecting your characters to be complicated and show more than just one trait. And you've also had to, after reading a little bit longer, revise how you think because you got new evidence. Okay, so those are the couple of things that we've done so far to think deeply about characters. We're going to keep thinking deeply about characters, and today we're going to kind of focus on genres. First of all, what are genres? What does that mean? Well, the best way that I think about what genres are is I think about different things, like I think about YouTube channels that I might be subscribed to, or channels that I might watch on TV, and then different kinds of books that I read. So those are genres kind of they help your brain do different kinds of thinking work. So when you get to a particular channel, you have an idea of what you're going to find already about what you're going to find already in your head. So for example, if you started watching ESPN, then your brain knows that you're going to be watching something that has to do with sports, and it might do some different things whenever you are watching sports. Or if you turn on Fox News or NBC News, then your brain has to do a little bit more nonfiction types of things. Is this true? Is it not true? Is it reliable? What are they saying? What's the big news? So your brain does different kinds of work whenever you're reading nonfiction or listening to the news. If I were to turn on the Hallmark channel and it was Christmas movies playing all week, then my brain's going to do different kinds of things. It's going to be thinking about all the love stories, and that's a whole different genre of its own as well. Okay, so we're going to kind of talk about some genres in some of the books that we have read and that we're going to be reading this year. Okay, so again, this is still thinking deeply about characters, but I want us to focus on genres. And while we're focusing on those genres, I want us to focus on, well, what do our characters do in these kinds of genres? And I also want you to start thinking about, how can that help me really get to think deeply and get to know characters better? How can genres help me get to know characters better? Okay, so one of the things that we're going to actually talk about to start off with is fantasy. Okay, so fantasy is our first genre that we're just going to discuss. So if I was thinking about fantasy, I've actually got a few things I wanted to share with you before we start talking about fantasy. I wanted to show you a few of my fantasy books that I have here, and we'll see if we see any kind of things in common. So if I'm thinking about Harry Potter, if I'm thinking about all the impossible things, just even if I don't know what this book is about, just even reading all the impossible things, that could help me know that might be about fantasy because of the word impossible. And even though this is a graphic novel, this can still be considered fantasy because of the things that it has in it. So this is a manga, and Dragon Ball Z is also considered a fantasy genre as well as a graphic novel. So I want you to think about those things for a second. What kinds of things, even though they're really different fantasy books, what do they have in common? So some of the things that I think about whenever I'm thinking about fantasy I noticed that sometimes fantasy books have things like magic or superpowers. I noticed that fantasy things usually there's like an enemy in a fantasy book. So I could say that there's an enemy. Another word you could say is a rival. Okay, rival or enemy. Usually my characters in my fantasy books that I have read, they have to go on some sort of a journey. Okay, they're doing something for some reason. And on that journey, usually they face a lot of challenges. And then one thing I did notice about most of my fantasies that I have read is that often the main character wins. Okay. So these things that typically happen, they're typical. Another word for that could be archetype. So your typical character who is in your fantasy book. Sometimes books, as we get older and get more mature, we get to read books that sometimes break the archetype. So when you're reading, and we'll talk more about those kinds of things in our fantasy unit, but when we're reading fantasy, I want you to pay attention to, did the archetype, is it typical, or did the archetype get broken? Okay, so you may not have thought about those kinds of things yet, but I want to start to plant that seed with you. Okay, let's look at another genre that I want to take a look at for just a moment. Historical fiction. All right, so I'm going to show you a few that I have here, and please forgive me, but I just love the World War II time. So a lot of mine have to do with that time period. Although this one right here, I know some of you love I Survived books. The Battle of D-Day, 1944. I have a whole set of these. My son loved these when he was in middle school and elementary school. So we have like a whole set because he wants to keep them. The next three are real similar. They're all by the same author, which when you're thinking about genres, a lot of times one author loves to write into that genre. So Alan Gratz is one of those, and I have some of his books here at the house. It's got Refugee, and you could see that if you just look at the back, this is talking about a Jewish boy, and he's in 1930s Nazi Germany. And then Prisoner B3087, concentration camps, you can just glance at. So this all has to do with the time of the Holocaust and World War II. And then Lita, the Yellow Star, and she's not Jewish, she'll be fine, won't she? So this is told from different perspectives during that time period. So these are all historical fiction. Well, what kinds of things do those historical fictions have in common? Well, if I'm thinking about historical fiction, for sure, some historical event that is usually bad is in a historical fiction book. So I'm thinking about a historical event. Now, I know this isn't really having to do with the character, but it's important to the character to keep these things in mind. So a historical event usually is bad. Okay. Usually in a historical, since they're usually a bad historical event, they're not all bad, but a lot of them are. So that also leads to that usually a character or other people in the character's lives or in the world are experiencing some type of injustice, some type of an unfairness or terror. Okay. And because of those things, there is suffering involved. And also because of the suffering and the injustice, unfairness, terror, the main character is usually fighting against some giant problem in society. So that's pretty typical, fighting against a giant problem in society. Almost. And then usually in many historical fictions, our main character is often gets to be the hero. Okay. They're still fiction, even though they're based off of nonfiction times. All right, one more I want to talk about today is your mystery. So when you're thinking about your mystery, I've just got a couple of mysteries here. Any of the school of fear books, Full of Good and Evil, Mr. Max, The Book of Lost Things. And if I just show you the back side of this one, you can see that it's a really short little blurb here. Max was supposed to meet his parents aboard the Flower of Cashmere, but when he arrived at the docks, there was no such ship, and no parents. Now Max must find them. So whenever you have a mystery, and there's even a bigger clue here, mysterious invitation. Okay, so that's what that is. When you have a mystery, someone's trying to figure something out. The main character is trying to figure something out. All right, and a lot of the times when they're trying to figure something out, they get clues. Now, some clues turn out to be good, and then some clues turn out to be dead ends. Okay, and the character usually will often have some sort of flaws that will get in their way of figuring out the clues. Okay, so I know whenever I would read some books that were mysteries when I was younger, I would say, as I got older and I would still read like a younger book with like one of my younger brothers or sisters, and I would be like, why can my little brother or sister not see what's going on here? But as you get older, the mysteries get more mysterious and more difficult to guess. But in the book, the character sometimes has flaws that stop them from being able to figure out, or they get in the way. So they often have flaws that get in the way. And like the Magic Tree House, for example. I know the little girl, she would just rush towards the next step and miss information. So that was like her biggest flaw that would get in the way. And the boy, her brother, would study meticulously, and he would have like a dictionary and an encyclopedia, and he would know all of the things. But sometimes he would miss stuff that she would catch, and she would miss stuff that he would catch. So they made a great team. And then usually the characters wind up, usually I think in most mysteries, they've solved the mystery, but the whole point ends up being that they grow outside of solving the mystery. They grow within themselves. They grow and accomplish more than just solving the mystery. So they have a lot of growth and solve the mystery. Okay. So we have 3 genres that we're just kind of glancing at really quickly here. So why are we doing this? How does this right here relate to the genres? How does knowing what to expect in genres help us think deeply about characters? How do you think that knowing about genres help us think deeply about characters? How are those things related? So I've been thinking about this, and I'm gonna write a couple of notes just to help me get those thoughts straight. Okay, so whenever I know stuff about something already, then that really helps me to make predictions about what might happen in another situation. So, for example, if I read a book that was a mystery and I knew that they're looking for clues, and then I know that I'm reading the next mystery, then my brain is going to start doing this work, and it's going to be like, oh, look for clues. So background knowledge helps us make predictions. Okay, so that background knowledge is very helpful for whenever you're reading something new. Okay, you may not know what that book is about, but you may know another book that's a similar genre, and it helps you have background knowledge, and that will help you make predictions. And as we know from our launching unit, making predictions is one of the ways that we can really deepen our thinking about our reading. Helps make predictions. Okay. So I want you to, often what you do is you think of a character from another genre. You think of other genres. You think of characters from other genres. You might even just think of a character from the same author in a different book that they wrote, just from that same one author. That goes even further your thinking in predictions about a character from the new book. Think of characters from the same genre. I'm going to say genre or author. I know for me, whenever I really love reading an author, I'll just keep reading that author over and over again. You can compare the stories, and you can also compare the characters. And then what we're doing here is we're making text-to-text comparisons, and that helps us to think about themes, and the characters really come together beyond the book. So those things are really important to help us get to know our characters better in the book that we're reading now. Characters from other books can help you know the characters that you are interacting with in this book that you're reading. Okay? So some things that I would like for you to do. I would like, when you're reading, is to think about your genre. Think about the genre in the book that you're currently reading, and use that genre to think about other books, other characters from the same genre or the same author. And I want you to start thinking and comparing those stories and characters to make that text-to-text connection, okay? All right, so then I want you to think about how the other characters in your book's genre are similar. All right, and whenever you go to practice today, you're going to read, you'll annotate in your reader's notebook, and don't forget your choice boards are due after the next session. So you should be well into starting a choice board or have started the choice board. Just remember that they are going to be due after the next session. All right, thank you so much.